Kia ora and welcome to the Beer Jerk Beer of the Week Drink Along. I'm Luke and this week we're drinking Silent Night from Modus. Just take a moment to appreciate these beautiful tabs on these Modus cans. Pretty awesome how they've got those custom made. It's not a thing you see very often. This week we're drinking a porter from Modus. So we had a beer from Modus last week, so we chatted about those guys a bit. So if you missed that video, maybe you could pop back into that one and find out a bit more about those guys. But it started off as a husband and wife team who decided to jack everything in and sell their apartment, to quit their jobs and start a brewery, but not before they'd spent many months traveling the USA, learning all about beer and craft beer and tap rooms. And now they've got a couple of fantastic looking venues in Australia. I haven't managed to visit yet. There's a big brewery that came online last year up in Newcastle, and doing all kinds of interesting beers. They're really well known for their Noughts range. And that started about during a pregnancy, and just realising that there weren't a lot of good non-alcoholic beers to drink. So that birthed, as it were, the Nought range of beers, which are some of the best non-alcoholic beers I've had, certainly. And this porter, Silent Night, the story is a little bit interesting. It's one that I only learnt about, after we bought it for the first time. Silent Night was the name of a revolutionary refrigerator in Australia. And it was the first affordable fridge, basically, that just most people could afford to own in their homes. But that came with a downside, that it was such a huge draw on electricity that the electrical companies actually had to come to an agreement with the inventors and the manufacturers that they would subsidise the electricity bills of the poor sods that had bought these refrigerators to keep them going. But luckily it all worked out in the end, and the inventor of the Silent Night is a national hero in Australia. Porters. You will read or see a lot about the difference between porters and stouts. I'm not going to get into it here, because there's a lot of bullshit out there, frankly. It's a bit like the story of the origin of IPAs, and it's you know that saying that a little bit of information is a dangerous thing, where someone hears something in a pub from someone else who doesn't really know what he's talking about, and before you know it, these silly myths are being spread around. Porters and stouts are they're pretty much interchangeable. I haven't got time to really get into it. I will share some good articles by some fantastic beer writers in the NZ Beer Jerks Facebook group. If you're not a member of the Facebook group, get on there. It's NZ Beer Jerks, and I'll chuck a link into the email as well. There's some great British beer writers that have talked a lot about the history. But the name certainly does come from London porters. And back in the olden days, in the 1700s, being a porter was one of the most populous jobs. Shit needed to get carted around. And before there were lorries and before there were Ubers, porters ported everything. So you had maritime porters and porters that worked on the docks and porters that loaded up the railways and dealt with dried goods. And so you had all these many different specializations. So it was, I don't know what an equivalent to today would be, but I suppose it would be like, a taxi driver, an Uber driver, a courier driver, a lorry driver, a train driver, just the way that stuff got around the massive city of London was thanks to this army of porters. And it was a very physical job, and it was a hard labouring job. So they enjoyed having a beer at the end of their day at work. And the porter was a type of stout that ended up being the beer that was the most popular. And again, you'll hear silly stories about it being, dregs of different kinds of beers mixed together, but that's pretty much nonsense, really. So if you're a fan of porters, you're probably also a fan of stouts. Very broadly, a porter is a little bit more light-bodied, but yeah, as I say, they're pretty much interchangeable words. These days, things have changed so much. This is a porter which is made with 9 kinds of malt, and it's very, very tasty. It was first released in I think it was 2017 by Modus as a seasonal beer, and it quickly entered their core range when they started doing these 375 cans. And just a note on that, how great is a 375 can? I feel like we don't really have them in New Zealand, but when we do imports from Australian brewers, people often just don't really notice because it's not as tall as a 440, it kind of looks like a 330, but there's a good extra few gulps in there than a 330. So it became part of their core range. Their inspiration for this was to do it's sort of a toned down Russian Imperial Stout, which, as you probably know, is a strong, boozy, pretty viscous beer style. So this has a lot of the flavour that you will get in that, but it's only 5.6%. So there's a lot packed into this. I mean, it's not a low alcohol beer by any stretch, but compared to a Russian Imperial Stout, it is. It's definitely more of a sessionable beer that you might have a few of rather than just one. And yeah, there's a lot going on. You've got lovely roastiness, nice malts to it. These days in the craft world of porters and stouts, it's really tempting for brewers to add adjuncts to them. And you might remember a few weeks ago we drank the Lagerhoo, which was a tropical stout. This is in that sort of vein, I suppose. There's no need to add vanilla and tonka beans to a stout. It's definitely fun to and it's delicious too, but you can do so much just with just carefully balancing different kinds of malts. You can get roasted flavors, you can get licorice flavors, you can get cocoa, espresso. And we're getting a lot of that with this beer. There's a beautiful dry finish, but to begin with, you do get a bit of a perception of sweetness. You get a bit of definitely like espresso powder notes to it, and just cocoa bean. It's a really well made beer, which is the sort of beer that you do get when you hone a recipe over time and just brew it again and again, which is exactly what Modus have done, using their, as it says in the can, their brewery, which is made, all their beers are made 100% green energy, which is pretty inspiring. It's a real commitment to do. And Modus wasn't really started by people with millions and millions of dollars. It was, as I say, started by a husband and wife that sold their apartment, chucked all their money into it, and it was a bit of a risk. So they've grown step by step. They're still very much independent, and they've invested all of the money that they've made from their explosive growth back into their kit to just brew in a really efficient way, doing things with green energy. It's a really good beer, and it's the sort of beer that I really enjoy drinking. As I say, it doesn't necessarily have the bells and whistles of being made with passion fruits and interesting adjuncts, but it's just there's a reason why beers like this have been popular for centuries, because they're fantastic. So good work, Modus. Other stuff that's going on, you may have noticed this week we announced the pre-launch of our fresh hop mixed case. Every year at Beer Jerk, we release a mixed case of beers with a whole bunch of the fresh hop beers that have come out. So ours is we call it the Full Harvest Box, and it's all of the best beers that come out from New Zealand brewers with fresh IPAs. So it is a 24 pack, and we put a lot of work into pulling it together, working closely with the brewers, making sure there's a good variety and a good balance in there of different kinds of hops and different styles. If you don't fancy getting 24 different beers, we're doing the Humulus box and the Lupulus box that each contain 12 of them, so the box is just split into half. So we'll be announcing the contents of those in the next day or two. So we put it up for pre-sale just because everyone was keen to get involved. We haven't yet announced exactly what beers are in there. So that's, literally this afternoon that got finalised, because also harvesting hops is an agricultural product. You don't know when it's going to happen. So coordinating it is a big headache for us every year. It's a really big job. But we really enjoy just being able to get these beers in here, packed up, out the door as quickly as possible. So if you don't know, the hops are harvested once a year in Nelson, but also all around New Zealand now. There's small hop farms popping up in various different locations, but Nelson is where the majority of them are. And Hops are then dehydrated and pelletized into small pellets that look like rabbit food. And then they're vacuum packed and chilled, and then they're used by brewers to brew beers. But if you get these wet hops off the vine very quickly and put them into a beer, within a day or two, you get a really unique tasting beer. And hop cones are actually flowers. So it treats them exactly the same as flowers. They need to be cold and they need to go straight into the beer before they start to go moldy, basically. And fresh hop beers are unique. They're not hoppier or bitterer. A lot of people that are drinking fresh hop beers for the first time, they expect that it's going to be a beer that's going to blow their socks off with bitterness and fresh hop flavour. But the fresh hop flavour isn't more hoppy. It's hard to describe, really. It's more delicate. There's layers in there. There's real interesting expression of the hops that you just simply can't get once the hops have been dried. So it's like in France they have Nouveau Beaujolais Day every year, which I think a lot of people get excited about. And this is what we have in beer in New Zealand, and it is quite a New Zealand thing. There are fresh hop beers made in Britain, a few in Australia, but in New Zealand it's a big thing that many brewers get behind. And it all came about thanks to Tracy from Spring and Fern, who she was the head brewer at Max many years ago, and came up with a beer called Beaujolais, which is made with the wet hops. And since then, more people have jumped on board, and the hop farms have jumped on board. So it's become a real day for time for celebration. So anyway, check out our website. You can find the fresh hop mix case. You can grab it, have a little fresh hop festival at your place. Or if you fancy getting out and about, also every year we organise the Auckland Fresh Hop Festival. So that's going to be run here at the Fridge and Flagon, at Galbraith, just over the road, and just a little walk down the road at Lumsden. So all three venues on the 22nd of April, mark your diaries, will be simultaneously launching a whole bunch of different fresh hop beers on keg. It's going to be a really fun day. In past years we put on minibuses to shuttle people around various bars, but we're just not bothering that this year. It's too much hassle, to be honest. But it's not far to walk from here to Galbraith and then down to Newmarket. So fresh hops, get involved. I'm going to wrap things up. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being part of Beer Jerk. It's really fun drinking these beers with you every week. I look forward to hearing what you think of this one. See you next time.